Hey guys, I'm going to read some of my novel serial today, just like the first part. I might be doing these weekly, I might not. I only have 3 parts published out right now, and I'm working on part 4. Basically, I'm kind of procrastinating writing. Um, NaNoWriMo is kicking my butt. Currently I am at 6,633 words, so that was better than Saturday. So I am going to write more after I make this video. I just figured I would read it and maybe share on Facebook or something. I don't know. So yeah, this is the Robin Windsor Case Files, Part 1. Well, Serial 1, Week 1, whatever you want to call it. November 3rd, 1996, 15 years ago. It was cold. The feeling of emptiness had spread throughout the house, even though there were 2 people inside. They were still missing one. Mary Windsor sat at the kitchen island, head in her hands and tears running down her cheeks and landing on the island top. Her 9-year-old daughter sat in the living room. The only sound that she could hear was that of her mother's crying. The girl was trying to ignore it and be a bit more positive in her thinking. Her eyes were settled on the door. It opened any minute. Her dad would come stumbling in, profusely apologizing to her and her mother. "Lost track of time," he'd say, trying to shrug off the day of stress and the death glare her mother would give him. Mom would rub her swollen belly, wipe the tears from her eyes, and tell him how worried they both had been. Any minute, right? Robin sure hoped so. Robin waited weeks for her father to walk, stumble, or fall through the door. She sat every night staring at the front door, neglecting her own sleep and hoping that her mother would please stop crying. It made her feel terrible, to be honest. She had to put a grown-up face on for her mother, trying to pretend she really wasn't as upset as she was. Try to pretend that her mother's sobs didn't bother her. It was hard for a 9-year-old to handle, and often she spent nights and nights at her close friend's house crying because she didn't want her mother to see how much the whole situation was affecting her. The police declared him dead after 2 years of missing. There was a small funeral, which Hannah, being only 2 at the time, barely understood why her mother and sister were both crying so hard, or why she had the dress in such dark colors. It had been a pretty day, and the toddler wanted to run and play and smile and giggle, but she had been scooped up before she could run over any neighboring graves. The first big event in Robin Windsor's life was that of her father disappearing. Other big events would be puberty, entering high school, and getting accepted into college. Normal, everyday growing up type of things. I can't talk. However, the big event of her father's disappearance would be something that would continue to follow her throughout her life. She would think about it nearly every day for years after it happened. With the birth of her younger sister, I can't talk. Hannah, she tells stories to her about their dad, how much he loved the 2 of them, and all the things that he planned to shower upon Hannah as soon as she was born. Due to the circumstances, their father didn't get to do any of these things, but Robin refused to let Hannah grow up and believe that their father abandoned them. He didn't. Robin wasn't really sure what exactly had happened, but it was an abandonment. Words. As the years went by and her father never stumbled through the front door of their home, Robin silently set out on her own mission. She needed to find out what happened to her father, no matter the cost. She needed to know, for her sake and her own sanity, that whatever happened to her dad was something that he couldn't control. The note-taking and article reading was something that started long before college. Robin read anything that she could get her hands on about her father's former employer in Xavier Zachariah for up to 10 years before her father's death. Mr. Zachariah had been extremely kind to their family, giving them money for the burial of her father. But once she got old enough, she realized, words. But once she got old enough, she wondered what exactly was said behind closed doors between Mr. Zachariah and their own mother. And she wondered if the money that had gotten them a new house and enough money where her mother could stay home for the first 3 years of Hannah's life was bribe money. Her own curiosity was something that she couldn't control no matter how hard she tried, and after years of building up her own case against Xavier Zachariah, she finally reached a dead end. There was nothing more that she could look up in nothing more that she could look up anymore. Look up about. Hold on, let me just start that paragraph over. Her own curiosity was something that she couldn't control no matter how hard she tried, and after years of building up her own case against Xavier Zachariah, she finally reached a dead end. There was nothing more that she could look up about Zachariah. She had read it all. Night after night, reading boring articles about how generous Xavier was to the city, how he built a new neighborhood, a new police station, a new school. It was these saintly acts that only made him look guiltier in her eyes. Maybe she was biased. Okay, she was definitely biased. July 27th, 2006, 9 p.m., 5 years ago. Sitting outside of Sitting outside of Zachariah Tower, there were two teenage girls in a fairly inconspicuous car. They were pulled up to the curb, and the parking meter was counting down the hour they had to park there on the quarter. The driver, a brunette with a more or less very panicked expression on her face, with her hands still tightly wrapped around the steering wheel even though the car was parked, was 18-year-old Stephanie Martz. Getaway driver for the blonde sitting in the passenger seat, who barely seemed scathed by the panicked expression of her friend, Robin Windsor. This is an absolutely terrible idea, Stephanie moaned, looking over at Robin for just a moment. The blonde was rolling her eyes. You're trying to get us arrested before we go off to college. You realize if we get arrested, our scholarships are blown, right? No scholarship, no college, no future for us, Robin. Not to mention that your mother will kill you and me. We'll only get arrested if we get caught, Robin replied calmly, reaching for the car radio. Maybe if she put some music on, Steph would forget that they were breaking the law and just listen to the music instead. With a switch, the car's speaker played some upbeat jazz song that had become popular in the last week or so. Not exactly calming, but it worked for now. If we get caught, that's a pretty big if. You realize that, right? You're going to try and break into a high-security building with likely armed guards, and you're telling me if we get caught, we're going to get arrested? The next sound out of Stephanie's mouth was a mix between a scream and a growl, and during this moment of insanity, Robin got out of the car and shut the door. Before Stephanie could start yelling at her again, the blonde moved quickly towards the front door of Zachariah Tower. The words. She pressed lightly on the front door and was extremely surprised when the door actually opened for her. She turned back to look at the car, briefly, only to see Stephanie sending her a death glare and mouthing something that Robin chose to ignore. Instead, she winked and stepped inside of Zachariah Tower. If their doors were still open, that meant someone had to be here still, right? While the whole breaking in thing was mostly covered. She still had to deal with the possibility of armed guards, locked doors, security alarms, and lasers. There were always lasers in situations like this. She could handle it. That half year of self-defense class during middle school could come in handy now, even if she was the one technically breaking the law. It was all a technicality. If Xavier killed her father, well, that was the bigger crime, wasn't it? She really needed to stop thinking and start moving. A deep inhale and exhale of air. Another look back towards Stephanie, who she was sure was having a heart attack by now. And then she stepped completely inside Zachariah Tower. That wasn't so hard, now was it? January 25th, 2011, present day. This was it. It's the final box to be unpacked in her new home. It had been a very long unpacking experience, but she was finally down to the last box. Deeply inhaling, she pulled the flags open, and almost instantly she laughed. A giant box, measuring 3 feet in height, nearly 3 feet in height, and there were actually very few things inside. Though scarce in number, the memories that these things carried were immeasurable. As quickly as she laughed, she began to tear up. The contents of the box were a picture frame that held a photo from her freshman year of college, a binder full of paper, newspaper clippings, and the like, and then a stack of college textbooks. She reached in and first dealt with the heavy, overly costly bound books. She put each of them neatly on the bookcase in her living room, and then she moved to the more personal bits of the box. The photo, which was of herself and her two best friends, went on the table by the couch and underneath the lamp. She pushed the box aside once she pulled the binder out. She hadn't looked at this thing since she'd been given it. 3 years now it had been since Robin's funeral. 3 years, and she hadn't touched the single thing that her friend had left her. Left, oddly enough, to her. There were a lot of things inside of this binder. Robin had always talked about it, but she had never looked inside. 3 years later, she could nearly hear Robin's voice now, as distant and hard to remember as it was, screaming at her. "This was my everything, Di. I trusted you. I told you about it, but I never showed you. I can't believe you haven't looked at it before now." She sighed and lifted the cover. Inside, taped to an empty page, was a scribbled note. "Diane, if something ever happens to me, follow my leads. You'll find out what happened. Robin." Her heart was thumping in her chest, her hands were shaking, and all the feelings that she had when she found out that Robin was dead were returning again. She had tears in her eyes and she was struggling to breathe. She shut the binder, pushed it only slightly away from her, shut her eyes and breathed deeply. It was the sign of Robin's handwriting 3 years after her death that was doing her in. It was the pang of guilt in her heart that made her pull the binder back towards her and open it again. She reread the note, breathing slowly this time, and went to the second page. It was a newspaper article from the Arrow Chronicles titled, and I spelled titled wrong. There we go. "Young man is rising to become an extraordinary company leader." She recognized the face in the picture instantly. A bit younger, less circles under his eyes, less craving for power. Xavier Zacharias, standing at a podium at one of his earliest conferences that was publicized on television. She looked at the date, October 13th, 2011. She'd been 13. But she remembered her mother and father sitting in the living room, and remembered her mother's remark about how cute this young man was. Sure, he might have been handsome, but even at the age of 13, Diane hadn't particularly liked the way Xavier looked. Besides general distaste, Diane had no real reason to dislike Xavier Zachariah. When they had met, which had only been a few times for her father's accord, he had been polite, charming, and even flirted with her a bit, despite the large gap in their age difference. Despite the large gap in their age. There we go, that sounds better. Robin's father, before his death, had worked for Xavier from the very beginnings of his company, rising from the lowly ranks of a desk worker to someone that was doing things for Xavier and having to hide it from his family. That Diane knew. But outside of that, she had no real reason for the sick feeling through her stomach when she looked at Xavier's picture. She read the article, which was just the general coming to fame story that the whole city knew involving Xavier's background. Sorry, I'm like improving my writing. Ugh. She laughed weakly at the mention that Zachariah is very single and is looking to get married in the future. The attitude towards Xavier's relationship status was just as talked about now as it had been then. Of course, he had quite a bit of baggage now. Perhaps it was the fact that Robin had always told her that Xavier was behind her father's disappearance. They hadn't even known each other before college, but after living with a girl for half a year and listening to her constant comments about how evil Xavier was, it started to rub off. Diane looked down at the binder. Well, she was supposed to find out why. Now wasn't she? "I'm sorry," Diane thought, hoping that Robin might be able to hear her thoughts. "I'm sorry this took so long for me to do. I didn't forget you, I promise." There was a feeling of sickness looming in her stomach, guilt that had been piled up for so long. She felt obligated to find out what happened to Robin, to put her own thoughts to rest. She needed to know the truth. because no one else did, and Robin wanted her to know. After all, she had left the binder to her. Diane wanted to make sure that it wasn't in vain. That's all. Another deep sigh and a glance down at the binder. So here we go, she mused and turned the page. Okay, so after many mess-ups and misreadings, I am done with the first serial. I am going to post this now to YouTube and possibly to Facebook and possibly to my Robin Windsor Facebook page. So, you guys should, I don't know, tell me what you think and all that. So, yeah. I know it's a lot of info dumping, but I kind of did that on purpose. It picks up in part 2 and part 3 and part 4. It goes back to Robin, because that's the main story, and then Diane will be like a secondary story, and then Xavier's past will be an entirely different thing. It'll probably be about half and half with Robin after I get the story developed. So, yeah. So that's all I really have. I just figured I would do a nano update kind of thing. So yeah, below will be the links to my Tumblr, the links to my Facebook page, and stuff like that. So I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, bye guys.